Have you ever sat down on a chair and felt, for a moment, that it might give way beneath you? Most of us have had that little jolt of worry, the creak of wood, the wobble of a leg, the sense that a seat might not be as solid as it appears. In the past, this worry was far more real. Chairs, while today they are simple and stable objects, once carried risks that went beyond a moment's unease. To sit was not always to rest. Sometimes to sit was to risk embarrassment, injury, or worse. Hello everyone, and welcome. Tonight we're going to drift back into the quieter, forgotten corners of daily life, where even something as ordinary as a chair could shape how people lived. And if you enjoy these calming journeys through history, I gently invite you to subscribe so you never miss another night of stories. When we think of history, we often picture thrones, benches in halls, or stools in kitchens. But what we forget is that chairs were not always common. For many centuries, most people did not own a personal chair. They sat on benches, stools, or the ground. Chairs were symbols of authority, reserved for leaders or elders, and their design reflected not only status, but also fragility. To sit in one was to expose yourself to the strength of the wood, the steadiness of the joiner, and the unevenness of the floor. A chair could betray you at any moment. The risk began with the materials. Wood, though strong, has flaws. A knot in the grain could weaken a leg. A poorly carved joint might loosen with time. In damp climates, moisture swelled the fibers until they cracked. In dry seasons, shrinking left gaps that made pegs slip loose. To sit was to trust that these hidden weaknesses would not reveal themselves when your weight pressed down. And for those who made chairs, the challenge was constant. How to craft something strong enough to hold, yet light enough to move. Imagine walking into a 15th century hall. Long tables stretch across the room, lined with benches where dozens sit shoulder to shoulder. At the head of the table stands a single chair, tall, carved, and narrow. It looks solid, but if one leg rests on an uneven stone, it may tilt. If the joiner's glue has weakened, it may wobble. To sit in it, especially in front of others, carried a risk not only of falling, but of losing dignity. A chair that broke beneath you was a humiliation remembered far longer than the bruise it left. Even simpler chairs, like stools, carried dangers. With only 3 legs, they could be stable on uneven floors, but they were also easy to topple if you leaned too far. Farmers and craftsmen who used them while working, weaving, carving, or cooking often had to balance carefully. One careless shift and the stool slipped, sending both person and task tumbling. These were not cushioned seats of comfort, but tools that demanded attention. Floors themselves added risk. In homes with packed earth, stools sank unevenly. On flagstones, they rocked. In timber halls, gaps between boards caught chair legs, tilting them suddenly. A person seated might find themselves jolted sideways with no warning. And unlike today, where most of us trust furniture to be tested and sturdy, there was little guarantee of safety. A chair was only as reliable as the craftsman who made it and the ground beneath it. Another danger came from design. High-backed chairs, symbols of status, were often tall and narrow. Their center of gravity was high, making them easier to tip. Add ornate carvings or heavy panels, and the weight shifted unevenly. If someone leaned or reached suddenly, the chair could topple backward. In a crowded hall, such a fall could cause more than laughter. It could cause injury or crush a cup or dish in the process. In workshops, chairs faced another hazard. Wear. A carpenter, for instance, might sit on the same stool for years, the wood polished smooth by use. Over time, legs wore unevenly, pegs loosened, and seats cracked. A stool that once stood firm now shifted with every move. But to replace it meant time and material, so people often used seats long past their safety. Many accidents came not from new chairs failing, but from old ones finally giving way. The perception of risk shaped behavior. In some households, important visitors were offered the best chair, but everyone else sat on benches or stools. This was partly about honor, but partly about caution. To offer a guest a weak chair was to invite shame. Stories circulated of chairs collapsing under nobles or officials, turning respect into ridicule. And so families inspected their seats before gatherings, testing joints and smoothing legs. The ritual of checking chairs was as important as preparing food. Even in simple homes, children learned to treat chairs with care. They were told not to rock, not to lean, not to drag them roughly. Every household knew that a careless moment could break not just the chair, but trust in its maker. The chair was not merely furniture. It was a fragile promise of safety. This fragility made chairs symbols as much as tools. To sit in one was to claim a place of authority, but also to accept a risk. The man on the bench could slide away quietly. The man in the chair could fall in front of all. Authority itself wobbled, quite literally, on four legs. And so, as we begin this journey into the strange risks of sitting, remember that the chair was not always what it seems today. It was a prize, a tool, a symbol, and sometimes a trap. The act of sitting carried weight not only in comfort, but in caution. To lower yourself onto a seat was to trust wood, joinery, and chance. And for centuries that trust was not always rewarded. Have you ever wondered what it meant to trust your weight to the hands of another? In centuries past, every chair began as an idea in a craftsman's mind and a piece of timber pulled from the forest. But in that shaping lay a burden. If the wood split, if the joint loosened, if the legs wobbled, the blame fell squarely on the maker. And when a chair collapsed under someone of importance, the shame clung to the craftsman as tightly as sawdust to his clothes. Chair makers were part carpenters, part problem solvers. Unlike benches, which could be simple planks on sturdy legs, or stools, which needed little more than balance, chairs required precision. Each piece had to meet at angles that would not only look right, but bear weight. If one joint faltered, the entire seat failed. Imagine the pressure, not just to carve beauty into the wood, but to make it survive the moment someone leaned back, shifted their weight, or tilted forward to reach across a table. The choice of wood was the first challenge. Oak was strong, but it could warp in damp air. Elm was resilient, but hard to carve. Pine was easy to shape, but too soft, prone to splitting under pressure. A chairmaker's skill lay in knowing not just the tree, but the life of the timber, when it was cut, how it was dried, where the knots hid. A poorly chosen log could doom a chair before the first chisel touched it. Then came the joinery. Pegs and mortises had to fit so tightly that even without glue they would hold. But wood moved with the seasons, swelling in summer and shrinking in winter. A joint perfect in May might rattle by January. The chairmaker had to predict the life of the chair, crafting it not just for the moment it left his workshop, but for the years to follow. And when it failed, people remembered not the seasons, but the man who made it. Tools added another layer of risk. A dull chisel left rough cuts that weakened edges. A careless saw left gaps. In workshops lit by small windows or smoky lamps, mistakes were easy to make. Yet no excuse could protect a chairmaker from scorn if his work betrayed its owner. The burden was silent but constant, the expectation that every seat must stand firm. Even decoration carried danger. Wealthier patrons wanted carvings, high backs, and intricate designs, but every flourish weakened the structure. A carved leg thinned by ornament might snap. A tall back, too heavy at the top, might tip. The chairmaker walked a tightrope between beauty and stability, pleasing the eye while still supporting the body. Many fell on one side or the other, remembered either for their art or for their failures. Stories spread of chairs collapsing in grand halls, of craftsmen mocked for their carelessness. A single failure could end a reputation. But for every story of shame, there were quieter tales of chairs that endured, passed from parent to child, their joints polished by time, their strength admired. These were the triumphs of unseen labor, the victories of those who carried the burden well. To sit was to trust the unseen, and to build a chair was to shoulder that trust, shaping not just wood, but confidence. The chairmaker's burden was heavy, and his mistakes loud. Yet his successes whispered across generations, every safe seat, a quiet testimony to his craft. Think for a moment of a great hall in the 15th or 16th century. Torches or candles throw long shadows on beams overhead. Smoke gathers faintly in the rafters, and tables stretch down the center, heavy with food, cloth, and conversation. Benches line most of the space, sturdy planks meant to hold many at once. But at the head of the hall stands something different, a chair. Larger, taller, more ornate, it belongs not to the many, but to the one. This chair, meant to display authority, carried risks far beyond splinters or creaks. To sit in it was to be seen by all, and to fall from it was to be remembered by all. Unlike a bench, which spread weight across many legs, a single chair bore the burden alone. And when floors were uneven, legs unsteady, or joints weakened by time, the danger was real. Imagine a noble lowering himself into such a chair. The room quiets, eyes watch, and then a sudden crack. The chair gives way, tilting him sideways. The hall erupts in laughter, and the man who commanded respect a moment before becomes the object of ridicule. The bruise to his pride might last longer than the bruise to his body. This risk gave the chair a strange double power. It could elevate, but it could also humiliate. The design of hall chairs added to the danger. Many were made tall, with narrow bases and heavy backs. Their center of gravity was high, which meant they could tip if someone leaned too far. Ornate carvings weakened the wood, making legs more fragile. And in halls where floors were stone or timber, no cushioning soft to fall. A toppled chair could mean broken bones as easily as broken pride. Chairs also became symbols in disputes. A man claiming a certain chair might be challenged, not only in words, but in the stability of the seat itself. A rival might mock its wobble, suggest its weakness reflected the weakness of the one who sat there. Authority rested not only on the man, but on the furniture beneath him. and so hall chairs were inspected carefully, reinforced with wedges, tested before gatherings. The risk of failure was too great to ignore. Even the placement of the chair carried hazards. At the head of the hall, drafts slipped in through doors, dampness crept up from the floor, and smoke gathered overhead. Wood swelled, shrank, and warped. A chair steady one season might tilt the next. Servants knew this and often shifted wedges beneath the legs just before feasts, ensuring the seat would not betray its master. But no matter the precautions, the risk never fully disappeared. Every groan of wood in a silent hall, every wobble beneath a cloak carried tension. To sit was to gamble with chance. Authority was fragile, and sometimes all it took was a failing chair to remind everyone of that truth. Thus, the great hall was not only a place of feasting, but also a stage where furniture itself could play tricks on pride. And in those echoes of laughter after a collapse, history reminds us that even power can wobble on four legs. Step away from the grand halls and into the humbler homes of towns and villages. Here, chairs were far less ornate, but no less risky. In fact, their very simplicity often concealed dangers. Unlike benches that spread weight or stools that balanced on three legs, chairs in everyday homes were patchworks of necessity, and necessity rarely made for perfect safety. Most homes did not have many chairs. A single one might stand by the hearth, reserved for the head of the family or for honored guests. Others relied on stools or benches. Because chairs were rarer, they were more prized, and thus more often used long past the point of safety. A chair with a loose leg was not quickly discarded. It was patched, wedged, or tied, but each patch was temporary, and every new sitter became the unwitting tester of its strength. Floors made the risks worse. Packed earth shifted with rain and dried with heat, leaving uneven patches beneath chair legs. One corner might sink, tilting the whole seat. On timber floors, gaps between boards caught legs, wrenching them sideways. Even stone floors were not safe. A single uneven flag could rock a chair with every shift of weight. In homes where people moved constantly, carrying pots, tending fires, working at looms, a sudden topple was not only embarrassing but dangerous. A fall into a hearth or against a sharp tool could leave lasting marks. Children, too, added to the risks. Told to leave chairs alone, they climbed them anyway, rocking and wobbling until a leg gave way. Many stories circulated of a family chair collapsing under the games of restless children, only to betray its true owner when they returned to sit. The laughter of play often masked the damage done, and the break appeared at the worst possible time. Repairs, though clever, brought their own hazards. Some families bound loose legs with rope, only for the rope to fray and snap. Others hammered pegs into cracks, which sometimes split the wood further. A leg shortened by repair tilted the seat forever after, forcing the sitter to balance carefully each time. A patched chair was both a sign of thrift and a constant reminder of risk. Even the act of moving chairs created danger. Unlike stools, which were small and sturdy, chairs had awkward shakes. Dragging one across a rough floor loosened joints. Lifting one carelessly caused bumps and cracks. And when families gathered for meals, the simple act of shifting chairs into place sometimes ended with a sudden collapse, the quiet meal interrupted by a thud and startled cries. Because chairs were rarer, Their failures were more memorable. Families could recount the time a visitor sat and fell, or when the old chair gave way during a meal. These stories lived in memory, reminders that furniture was not as reliable as we think today. The risks made people cautious, teaching them to test before they sat, to listen for creaks, to feel for wobble. Sitting became a small act of trust, repeated daily. In these homes, the chair was not only a piece of furniture, but a quiet test of resilience. To sit safely was a small victory. To fall was a shared lesson. And through those lessons, people learned that comfort could carry hidden costs, that even the simplest act of sitting had its dangers. Have you ever noticed how a single object in a room can change the way people behave? In earlier centuries, chairs were not just for sitting. They were symbols of pride, authority, and identity. And because they carried such weight, the risks of using them went beyond splinters or wobbles. A chair could raise someone higher in the eyes of others, but if it failed, it could drag their pride down with it. In many towns, families who could afford a chair displayed it prominently. It was set by the hearth or placed at the head of a table, so that visitors would see it first. It became a statement. This household has a proper chair. To own one was to show stability, not only of the seat, but of the family itself. But the danger lay in the gap between appearance and reality. A chair that looked fine but creaked under weight was a silent betrayal waiting to happen. Guests would hesitate, testing its strength before settling down, for everyone knew the embarrassment of a chair collapsing mid-visit. Carpenters understood this pride and played into it. They offered chairs with carvings, high backs, or decorative finials, pieces that showed skill as much as strength. But the more a chair was decorated, the weaker it often became. Ornament weakened wood, making it prone to splitting. Pride demanded beauty. Safety demanded sturdiness. Rarely could both be achieved fully. Families risked more than broken furniture when they chose looks over reliability. They risked ridicule. Even the act of offering a chair became a test of pride. When a guest entered, the question of who would sit in the best seat mattered. Offering the chair showed honor. But if that chair wobbled, the honor turned quickly into insult. To be offered a poor seat, or worse, to have it collapse, left lasting impressions. In this way, the risks of chairs spread beyond physical danger into the fragile realm of reputation. In larger households, chairs multiplied, but so did their risks. Servants carried them into position for gatherings, but every movement loosened joints and strained legs. Guests shifted them on uneven floors, and with each scrape, the chance of failure grew. A room filled with chairs seemed like a mark of wealth, but it was also a room filled with potential embarrassment. The pride of owning a chair also extended across generations. A family chair, passed from parent to child, was more than furniture. It was memory, identity, and legacy. To lose it through breakage was not only to lose a seat, but to lose a piece of the family's story. Yet the longer a chair survived, the more dangerous it became. With age, joints wore thin, and every new sitter was gambling with history itself. And in the midst of this, one truth endured. Pride made people blind to risk. They displayed chairs beyond their safe years, used them despite creaks and tilts, and trusted them when they should not have. Pride often outweighed caution, and time after time the chair reminded them that pride could topple as easily as wood. By the way, if you're enjoying this slow walk through forgotten details of history, I'll gently remind you to subscribe so you can return for the next story whenever you wish. It's always better to explore the past together, one calm step at a time. Chairs may seem most natural in halls or at tables, but they were also present in the places where daily work never stopped, the workshops and kitchens. Here, chairs were not symbols of pride, but tools of function. And like any tool, they carried their own hidden dangers. In the workshop, stools and chairs bore the weight of craftsmen. Carpenters, weavers, shoemakers, and tailors spent long hours seated, their hands busy while their bodies relied on wood beneath them. Yet these were chairs of constant strain. A carpenter leaned forward, shifting weight unevenly. A weaver rocked slightly as the shuttle passed through threads. A shoemaker bent low, pressing tools against leather. Each action tilted the seat, wore the joints, and tested the balance. Over time, no chair escaped this slow punishment. The danger was sudden collapse. A leg that had been sturdy yesterday might split today, sending tools and worker tumbling. In a workshop filled with sharp edges, saws, knives, chisels, such a fall could be more than embarrassing. It could be costly or even dangerous to life. And so craftsmen learned to test their seats before beginning work. They pressed on them, tapped them, shook them, listening for the creak that warned of weakness. The chair was not an afterthought. It was a silent partner in every task. Kitchens carried different risks. Here, chairs and stools lived in heat and smoke, near fire and steam. Dampness swelled the wood, drying shrank it again, and constant movement loosened its joints. A cook might balance on a stool to reach a high shelf, only for the leg to skid on grease or ash. A servant might sit for a moment's rest, only to fall as the seat tipped unexpectedly. Kitchens were busy places, and when a chair failed, it rarely failed in quiet. Pots clattered, food spilled, tempers flared. Children added to the risks. In both workshops and kitchens, they perched on chairs too tall for them, rocking or leaning, testing limits. To an adult, the wobble of a chair was a warning. To a child, it was a game. And often enough, the game ended with a sudden crash. Repairs here were common, but rarely perfect. A craftsman might patch his own stool with nails or scraps of wood, making it usable but never safe. In kitchens, ropes or strips of cloth held legs together temporarily, but they frayed in heat and damp. Every repair was a reminder that the chair had already failed once and might again. What made chairs in these spaces especially risky was their invisibility. In a hall, everyone watched the chair at the head of the table. In a home, the family chair was treasured. But in workshops and kitchens, the chair was ordinary, unnoticed, until it betrayed its sitter. And because of this, many of the worst accidents came not from pride, but from neglect. Even so, these chairs endured. They bore scratches, burns, stains, and cracks. They carried the weight of work and rest, of meals and labor. And in every mark, they told the story of lives lived close to survival, where nothing could be wasted, not even a chair on the edge of breaking. Chairs, for all their usefulness, also carried with them the power to embarrass. To fall from a bench was one thing. Many could laugh together and rise again. But to fall from a chair, especially in front of others, was different. It singled out the sitter. It turned a moment of rest into a spectacle. And in societies where pride, dignity, and reputation carried immense weight, a failing chair could be as sharp as any insult. Consider a small gathering in a townhouse. Friends and family sit together, some on benches, others standing, while one guest is offered the lone chair. It is an honor, a quiet acknowledgment of status. But as the guest settles, the chair creaks. A moment later, the leg splinters and the guest crashes to the floor. Laughter bursts out, then falters as faces turn to see the damage done. The fall leaves not only a bruise but a lasting memory. For months, perhaps years, the story will be told. Do you remember when the chair gave way beneath him? The chair, in this way, became more than furniture. It became a weapon of humiliation. In larger gatherings, the embarrassment grew sharper. Public feasts, weddings, or meetings were occasions where many eyes turned toward the person seated. A collapse here was not private, but public. The sound of breaking wood rang loud, followed by gasps and then laughter. Even those who wished to remain polite could not erase the image from memory. Pride toppled with the chair, and recovery was slow. Children knew this power instinctively. They pulled chairs from beneath one another as jokes, watching friends tumble in surprise. The laughter of youth softened the insult, but the idea was the same. To make someone fall was to momentarily strip them of dignity. The chair was the perfect accomplice, a silent partner in the game of mockery. Even in courts and councils, where authority sat on chairs while others stood, the danger was there. A councilman leaning too far, a noble's chair tipping on uneven stone. Such accidents sparked whispers. Was it just bad luck, or was it a sign of weakness? In places where image mattered as much as power, a wobbling chair could shake confidence as surely as a faltering speech. The embarrassment of chairs lingered in another way as well. They revealed poverty. A patched, wobbly chair in a home was a mark of necessity, but also of judgment. Guests noticed when furniture was weak. They saw the ropes binding legs, the wedges propping corners. Every imperfection became a silent comment on the household state. Families knew this, and many displayed their best chair proudly, even if it was not the safest. Pride outweighed comfort. Appearance outweighed risk. Thus, chairs carried double edges. They offered comfort, but threatened humiliation. They showed status, but revealed weakness. And in the laughter or whispers that followed a collapse, the chair proved itself a subtle weapon, one that struck not with wood, but with shame. In public life, chairs became more than places to sit. They became stages where accidents, rivalries, and tensions played out. Meeting rooms, guild halls, roadside inns, and council chambers all held chairs of varying quality, shared by many people rather than claimed by one household. And the more people a chair served, the greater the risks it carried. Unlike family chairs, which belonged to a single home and were carefully guarded, public chairs lived hard lives. They were dragged from corner to corner, scraped across uneven floors, lent to strangers, and repaired hastily by whoever had the tools at hand. One day a merchant rested on it, the next a craftsman, the next a traveler passing through. Each sitter left behind a little more wear. A loosening of the joints, a scrape of the legs, a dent in the seat. The chair grew weaker with every guest, and yet it was always expected to be ready for the next. In guild halls, where meetings of craftsmen or officials took place, the chair, at the head of the room carried special weight. Whoever sat in it carried authority, but also risk. A collapse here was not merely personal, it shook the image of leadership. A guild master who fell mid-speech might laugh to recover, but the whispers afterward lingered. If he cannot sit firmly, can he lead firmly? The chair was both pedestal and trap. Roadside inns and gathering halls where people paused during travel or business multiplied the risks even more. Seats that were rarely matched, often pieced together from scraps. One chair might stand solid, another ready to split at the next shift of weight. For the unsuspecting visitor, it was impossible to tell which was which. And when a fall happened in such places, it became a shared story, retold to newcomers for weeks afterward. A broken chair was entertainment as much as inconvenience. The dangers grew sharper in crowded spaces. Picture a meeting where men leaned forward to argue, slammed fists on tables, and shifted chairs constantly. Each movement strained the wood. Every tilt brought it closer to breaking. A chair could collapse not from one man's weight alone, but from the restless energy of debate. In such spaces noise masked the warning creaks, and failure came suddenly, sending a participant sprawling across the floor. Even the act of borrowing chairs for public events carried hazards. Town feasts, weddings, and assemblies often required extra seating, and neighbors lent what they had. Chairs of every kind were gathered together, some sturdy, some fragile. Guests sat without knowing which belonged to whom, and collapses were common. The blame was rarely clear. Was it the borrower's carelessness or the lender's weak chair? Either way, the accident became part of the memory of the event. And there was one final danger in these shared chairs: neglect. Unlike in homes where a collapse meant direct shame for the family, in public halls the responsibility was shared, and thus blurred. A chair might wobble for years before anyone repaired it. Everyone knew it was risky, yet no one claimed the duty to fix it. These were traps left waiting, and only the unlucky sitter discovered them. Chairs in meeting places and gathering halls, then, were not only conveniences but constant gambles. They offered rest to countless people, yet at the same time they carried the quiet threat of collapse. To sit in one was to step onto a stage where the line between comfort and humiliation was thinner than most dared to imagine. Stories of collapsing chairs carried farther than the walls in which they broke. They slipped into memory, into gossip, and sometimes into history itself. Unlike other accidents, which faded quickly, a broken chair left a lasting mark because it was both funny and symbolic. It turned strength into weakness in the blink of an eye, and it reminded everyone present of how fragile dignity could be. In towns, stories of a chair collapsing under an important figure could travel across streets within hours. Neighbors repeated it, embellishing the details: the creak before the fall, the flailing arms, the startled cry, the laughter that followed. Each telling grew sharper, and soon the accident was not just an event, but a tale shared again and again. For years afterward, people might refer to someone by the memory of that moment, the man whose chair gave way. In families, collapsing chairs became part of household lore. Children heard of how their grandfather once tumbled during a feast, or how an aunt's patched chair betrayed her during a visit. These stories were retold with laughter, yet they carried warnings too. Chairs should be respected, tested, and repaired, because no one wanted to repeat the fall. Memory became a teacher and embarrassment became tradition. Some collapses grew even larger in meaning. In guilds or councils, a leader's fall from a chair could be remembered as a metaphor for decline. Do you recall when his seat broke beneath him? Might be said years later, after his authority had faltered in other ways. The accident became a symbol, a way of explaining events through the simplest of images. A man unable to stay upright in his own chair. But collapsing chairs also inspired innovation. Craftsmen, embarrassed by failures, sought sturdier designs. They thickened legs, strengthened joints, and tested wood more carefully. The memory of a collapse pushed makers to improve. Thus, the risks of chairs shaped not only stories but progress. Each fall was both a humiliation and a lesson. Even in literature and plays, the image of a collapsing chair appeared. Writers used it to show weakness or folly. Audiences laughed at the sudden shift from control to chaos. The chair became more than furniture. It became a character, unpredictable and sharp. Its betrayal on stage mirrored the betrayals of life, where the ground could shift beneath anyone without warning. What lingers most, though, is the way these stories soft with time. What was once embarrassment turned into humor. What was once a fall turned into a family tale told by firelight. Collapsing chairs taught not only caution, but humility. They reminded people that even the proudest could be brought low, and that laughter could be found in even the smallest failures. And if you've been enjoying this long journey through the strange history of chairs, I'll gently remind you once more to subscribe. It helps keep these quiet stories alive and ensures you won't miss the next time we step together into forgotten corners of the past. Through centuries of creaks, cracks, and collapses, chairs slowly transformed. What had once been fragile symbols of pride, risky tools of work, and occasional traps of humiliation began to change into something more trustworthy. By the later centuries, people had learned enough about wood, design, and used to create chairs that held steady, not perfectly, but with a confidence unknown before. The first step toward safety was better knowledge of materials. Craftsmen realized that not every piece of wood was suited for every part of a chair. Harder, denser timbers served well for legs, while lighter woods could shape backs and seats. They dried planks carefully, reducing the swelling and shrinking that once loosened joints. With patience and planning, they produced chairs that resisted the tricks of season and weather. Joinery, too, improved. Instead of relying only on pegs and glue, makers refined their methods. Mortise and tenon joints were cut more precisely, and braces connected legs to each other for stability. Crossbars, once simple afterthoughts, became essential, binding the structure together so that one wobble did not doom the whole chair. Every improvement made sitting a little less of a gamble. Design played its part as well. High-backed chairs were balanced with broader bases, their weight distributed more evenly. Seats grew wider, spreading pressure more naturally. Legs were angled outward, giving chairs better footing on uneven floors. What once tipped easily now stood firm, even when the ground beneath was less than perfect. The lessons of countless collapses were carved into every improvement. Public life also demanded sturdier furniture. Inns, guild halls, and council chambers could no longer risk constant humiliation. Craftsmen tasked with supplying these spaces built for durability, using thicker beams and stronger supports. The chairs lacked some of the grace of earlier designs, but they survived far longer under the weight of many. Practicality outweighed decoration, and safety began to win. In homes, chairs shifted from rarity to familiarity. Families who once owned only one or two now gathered several, enough to seat everyone. With this change, the risks of pride softened. Chairs were no longer reserved for the honored few, but shared by all. They became not symbols of status, but companions of daily life. And as their numbers grew, so too did the expectation that they should endure. Still, chairs never lost all their dangers. Even well-made seats could fail if neglected, and accidents never vanished entirely. Children continued to climb, to rock, to test limits. Floors remained uneven, joints still wore thin. But the fear of sudden collapse lessened, replaced by the quiet trust we carry today, the assumption that when we sit, the chair will hold. This shift marked more than comfort. It reflected a broader truth. Human patience with failure often leads to strength. Each broken chair, each laugh at a collapse, each careful repair taught lessons. And over time, those lessons built chairs strong enough to turn risk into routine, accident into memory, fragility into confidence. So as we end this journey, think of the chair beneath you now. Its steady legs and balanced frame are the quiet descendants of centuries of mishaps. What once wobbled now waits calmly. What once betrayed now supports. And in that steady seat lies the proof that even the smallest objects in life carry long histories. Histories of trial, failure, laughter, and, at last, endurance.